Hey, what up, guys? I'm coming to you this morning. I want to do a breakdown of the world titles, like describing the world titles in boxing. Because, they're not lying when they say the alphabet belts. But, it's funny, as much as they say as world titles are insignificant, they're actually very significant. Most of the fights are for world titles, and all the big names are world champions, most of them. So, these belts mean something, and I want to kind of break down each governing body and, kind of how these belts go. Because I know you guys hear WBA, WBO, WBC, IBF, and then, there's WBA Super, there's WBA Regular. I want to break down what all these things mean, so people are a little less confused, because it is confusing. It's very fucking confusing. But I'm going to jump into that. And I want to we'll start with all the belts. So the four major world titles in each weight class, are they make up the undisputed world championship in the weight class. So there's four different governing bodies that have world title belts. So you have the WBA, the World Boxing Association. They've been around pretty much the longest. You have the World Boxing Council, who's been around similar amount of time. You have the International Boxing Federation, which is the IBF. They've been around since like the mid-'80s. And then you have the World Boxing Organization, which is the WBO. They've been around since the 90s. Now, these four belts, like I said, make up an undisputed world champion now. Now, since these four belts, you've only had how many guys have won all four belts? I think only 4 times now since the WBO's been around and been acknowledged as an undisputed world championship, part of the undisputed world championship. We've only had 4 fighters ever win all 4 titles. Yeah, Bernard Hopkins unified belts against Oscar De La Hoya back in the early 2000s at middleweight. He held the 4 belts until Jermaine Taylor beat him and took all 4 belts. Then, just a couple years ago, Terrence Bud Crawford did it. He became the undisputed junior welterweight champion. That's 140 pounds when he beat Julius Indongo. And then just last year, it was Alexander Usyk did it with a crushing decision victory in the World Boxing Super Series final at cruiserweight. That's 200 pounds. So again, you've had undisputed champions. They had the 3 belts prior to the WBO being recognized. We had a couple, but it's rare to get all the belts together. Excuse me. But I kind of want to break down each governing body so people understand, they know which belts, or try to at least identify with certain fighters and certain champions who's holding what belts and what they actually mean. So we'll kick off with the newest belt of the 4, which is the WBO world title. Generally, this is a black leather belt, sometimes green. And this belt came along pretty much as a European championship. There's a lot of European fighters in the 90s were holding this world title before it was legitimately recognized in the 2000s. Nowadays, you got Terrence Crawford, Anthony Joshua. Terrence Crawford at welterweight holds the WBO belt. You got Anthony Joshua at heavyweight holds the WBO. You got Vasily Lomachenko at his weight class at lightweight that holds it. Canelo beat Kovalev for the WBO world title. So, that's that one. Again, that's the World Boxing Organization. And they have some credible fighters. They're pretty legit. Except the WBO and the next one we'll talk about, they tend to rank guys that really you don't know. They haven't really done anything to earn their spot. Sometimes they'll have an eliminator. But, they're pretty straightforward. They'll have an interim champion waiting around for a world champion. They'll have a mandatory challenger at least once a year. The WBO, maybe the least of the corruption in boxing with the title belts. We'll get to that in a minute. Next up is the IBF, the International Boxing Federation World Title. This title came along in the 80s. It was part of the undisputed title when, like, Lennox Lewis beat Evander Holyfield for the heavyweight belt. Mike Tyson was the undisputed champion with the IBF belt. This is generally the red title. This is the red leather belt right here. Again, Anthony Joshua holds that heavyweight belt as well. That's one of the 3 that he holds. You got just a few good world champions that hold this belt. Errol Spence at welterweight holds that world title. That's a big one. Let me see. Triple G at 160 middleweight holds the IBF world title. So IBF title, legitimate belt, been around for a while. They're pretty basic too. They'll have an interim champion at, right now at 122. Ryosuke Iwasa from Japan is an interim champion because he's waiting around for the world champion Daniel Roman to make his other mandatory belt of his world title. And, that's why that's going on. So, that's why they have an interim champion there. But for the most part, they get, the one thing I don't like about the IBF is they have, they too allow fighters that have done nothing to get mandatory title shots. And it's really a waste of time. And I really don't like how they do that. But I do like that they don't have a lot of distinctions. It's either you got a world champion and then you might have an interim champion waiting around. But for the most part, they get their mandatories done. They're pretty strict. I also like about them that they have a next day weigh-in. They're the only governing body that does this, where you cannot weigh more than 10 pounds the next day after the weigh-in. So the day of the fight, basically. So you weigh in, and say you weigh in at middleweight. If you come in, which is 160, if you come in over 170 pounds the next day, you're no longer fighting for the title. The fight can still go forward, but you will not be eligible to win that world title. Daniel Jacobs, that's what happened to him when he fought Triple G. He came in, he looked huge that night against Triple G because the IBF title was not on the line in that fight for him. It was on the line for Triple G, the champion, but it was not on the line for Jacobs. But Canelo made sure Jacobs was going to have to pay a lot of money, which actually Jacobs ended up paying if he did not, if Jacobs did not fight, if Jacobs did not come in on weight. So, I do like that they do that. They do try to control the guys' weights and not let these guys get out of control and come in super heavy. The next governing body, the WBC. This is a very recognizable belt, maybe the most recognizable. This is the green leather belt right here. Deontay Wilder holds this belt. This was Floyd Mayweather's belt back in the day. Canelo has held this belt a few times. A lot of good fighters hold this belt. Errol Spence right now is the welterweight champ with the green belt. Very recognizable world title right here. And, I really, I like the WBC a lot for a long time, but they've gotten very corrupt over the last couple of years. Now they have, WBC, they have a bunch of different belts, but it's generally, they do interim champions, yes, but they don't really make if they have a star who's willing to pay, they really don't make these guys do fight their mandatories very often. Like Adonis Stevenson had mandatories due. He was champion for 4 or 5 years, and I think he only made one mandatory defense, and it was when he lost the world title. So they're very lenient. Like Floyd Mayweather, they would allow him to stay champion forever. Canelo too. They laid down for a lot of the big names just so they can have their world title a part of their a part of the big fights, and I really don't like that about the WBC. But WBC is still a very recognizable world title. I don't like this year they came out with the franchise champion. I mean, so Lomachenko went and won the lightweight world title, and then they deemed him the franchise WBC champion, and the title became vacant. And are they actually awarded the belt to the interim champion? I don't know why. Canelo, same thing happened to him at middleweight. He was a middleweight champ, and instead of having them force Canelo to face Jermall Charlo, who was the interim champ, they allowed Canelo to become the franchise champ, and Charlo became the world champ. He got upgraded. So I really don't like that. Force the guy to fight. Make it a mandatory, and if he says no, then you can give them some kind of distinction. Like WBC was really, I liked how they would do champion emeritus is what they used to call it, which basically meant you've proven so much that you can take off and leave, and then and not be the world champion anymore, but you're first in line to fight for that title if and whenever you wanted to. Like, you've done enough to where if you want to come back and fight for the world title, you move first in line. Vitaly Klitschko, the older of the two Klitschko brothers, he did this. He was out of action for 4 years. He had retired with injuries and stuff. He came back 4 years later and moved to the front of the line for the WBC title and won it, So I like that rule if a guy's proven enough, which Klitschko had. Canelo has. Lomachenko has unifying belts. But I don't like this franchise champion bullshit, It's stupid. It doesn't mean anything. And it's really dumb, and, it's really not a part of the Undisputed Crown, and I really don't like it. And not like Lomachenko, for instance, is the franchise champ, but when he tries to unify belts against Teofimo Lopez soon, he's the WBC official world title is not going to be on the line because somebody else is going to be champ. So I don't like that. And now we'll get into the WBA, the last one. This one has become the most corrupt. It's on most of the best fighters because, they have become so damn corrupt with their rules. The WBA has, in some divisions, not all the divisions, they have a super champion and a regular champion in a lot of divisions. The regular champion basically fights the mandatory challengers and stuff like that. Like, he can fight optional defenses, but he's like the other governing bodies. He's a regular world champ and he fights, but the super champion can fight whoever he wants. They only really do mandatory shots when they deem necessary, or when a fighter's been champion for I think his 5th consecutive title defense has to be a mandatory fight. But that's not even written in stone. This governing body nothing is written in stone with them, and I really don't like it. But the WBA regular belts mean something. Even though they're a secondary world title, they mean something. Like when Pacquiao beat Adrian Broner earlier this year, it was for the regular world title. This weekend coming up, Gervonta Davis is fighting Yuriorkis Gamboa for the regular lightweight title, but it's not for the super title. Vasily Lomachenko is a super champion. I do like the super champion status from the standpoint of when you unify belts, they do not, most of the time, if you're a unified champion and you get, the distinction of super champion, you do not have to make your mandatory defenses and stuff. So that leaves it open for bigger fights and you can hold on to belts. But with all these multiple champions, it's just crazy. It really is. It's really confusing, but these belts do mean something, guys. I mean, every fucking belt, you'll go into all my awards. Most of my awards, they're world title fights. Most of the top dogs, they're world champions because these belts do mean something. So, make sure, go back and look at this a couple times if you need to. I know it's all confusing. I didn't want to do this video, but I felt it was necessary to do this video because this shit is confusing. There's so many world titles, it's crazy. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this kind of in-depth boxing thing right here. Hope you enjoyed it. True Boxing, you've been hit with the truth.